Hey, welcome back to Behind the Label. Today we're doing a little on location. We're in front of what?
We're in front of Hartfield & Company. Harris's, or Bourbon County, I should say, first distillery since Prohibition.
Since
first and only.
Yeah. So keep watching, and we will be doing both an interview with head distiller Kelly, and we'll be doing a couple episodes on the early pioneers of bourbon.
We sure will. Enjoy.
Drinking dog whiskey, telling white lies.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Behind the Label. Today we are on location, lucky enough to be filming directly from a relatively new distillery, Hartfield & Company, in, where are we?
We're in Bourbon County.
Bourbon County.
Paris.
And you would think with a name like Bourbon County, there would literally be a distillery on every corner.
Yep.
This is the only one, it's the first and only one since 1919, if I understand.
Since Prohibition, yes. They opened up in 2014.
2014.
It's awesome that they let us come out here. Kelly, their head distiller, will be on later with us. And it's kind of cool to stay here at the bar.
Yeah, this is, we're actually in their, if you come here, and we're basically in their, I guess this would be called their visitor center or gift shop. Very nice, and then kind of all the distillery action actually happens both behind us and above us. So we're in a historic old building. Yeah. So I understand this was like some kind of a car dealership, and they actually have an elevator that was able to pick up cars and stuff, which makes it pretty handy for the bourbon. So today we're going to start out with a topic, it's kind of a general topic, which is basically some of the early founders and some of the early history of bourbon, especially as related to Kentucky, some of the pioneers of Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah, so it's kind of based off our tour, early pioneers. You know, it's looks back at the arguments of who was the first one.
Yeah, where did bourbon actually come from?
You know, if you're here in Bourbon County, it was Jacob Spears. If you were in Scott County, Georgetown,
Elijah Craig.
If you're in Louisville, it's Evan Williams.
Yeah.
And it could be anywhere else in between. There weren't a lot of records early on. So I mean they were coming through. They were coming through here in the late 1700s. Even before the Revolutionary War, people were coming into this area. Daniel Boone coming in 1769. So.
Right. Yeah, through the Cumberland Gap and up through the Wilderness Road, which is
Wilderness Trail.
Wilderness Trail, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
actually, I guess Wilderness Road. Yeah. I was going to say Wilderness Trail. Actually, I think draws part of their name from that.
Yeah,
because it comes through Danville down there.
Yeah. So a lot of the early distillers, if they didn't come down the Ohio, they come across the Cumberland Gap.
The Cumberland Gap. Yeah. Either from north or south of here.
Yeah. And so, when they first settled in here, they were promised 400 acres. If they built a cabin and raised 40 acres.
Now, they were promised that by the state of Virginia, as I understand.
State of Virginia, yes.
Who basically were giving out essentially land grants. And I know that there was even an additional size. For instance, if you were had served the Revolutionary War, I think there was in some of your stuff you provided me 800-acre grants.
Oh, you could add on to it. Yes, to the original.
So they had to actually purchase that extra land, or they were given that because of their service?
Very cheaply, you could add on to it. So, I mean, because we're talking about the time right now, we were part of Virginia.
Right.
We weren't Kentucky. They called us Kentucky.
Right.
But we were like a county, one big, large county.
Right, we were basically Western Virginia.
Yeah. Yes. So.
And we're talking probably late 1700s to basically the beginning of the 1800s, when you're really having a flood of people coming in. And a large portion of those people were either of Irish or Scottish descent.
They were.
So distilling was already a part of their culture. It wasn't like they came here and invented that. They brought that with them. In fact, there's stories of people giving up other goods to basically keep a still, for instance, on a wagon or on a mule or something, and they're willing to walk and be able to get their steel in here. That's how important it was to them, because it wasn't just a matter for them of drinking. It was a matter of a way to preserve extra grain. It basically served as a currency. You could trade with it. You could, at that time, there was still a large Native American population here. They could trade with the Native Americans. So it was as much a money as it was something that you enjoyed to drink.
It was. I mean, it was everything. Like I said, it was when you had excess corn, instead of just letting it go to waste, you could distill it and make money off of it. And that would store for a long time. You had for your family, friends,
right? And
like I said, extra currency. So that's what they would do.
Well, let's talk about where the actual, since we do mostly bourbon, that's our heart and soul. Well, we're going to open some of the Hartfield & Company bourbon. We just got this. We'll give it a try.
Yeah, this is, I'm trying to see the proof. It's 100 proof. So batch number 62, so it's a bottle, single bottle, or single barrel.
And this is a non-chill filter, I think she had told me back there, and that was just sort of my favorite way to process the bourbon.
A little bit.
Yeah, we'll try a little bit.
We can add on.
But we're going to start out, I think, with basically, kind of like we alluded to, why is it called bourbon in the first place? Since we're in Bourbon County and we've already kind of brought up some of the controversy,
Yeah.
what's the theories of why bourbon is called bourbon?
A lot of people think it was called, Bourbon because this is Bourbon County. And back in the day, early on, this stretched all the way to the Ohio River.
Right.
All the way up to what is now Maysville. And a lot of bourbon was shipped out of Maysville.
Right, down the
on the
Ohio,
Ohio River,
right.
down to Louisville. And it would be stamped, Bourbon County.
I was going to say, I've even read stories that on the barrel it even said whiskey from Bourbon County, or whiskey of Bourbon County, I think is the way it said it. So people would associate, hey, instead of just saying whiskey of Bourbon County, they'd just say, give me some of that bourbon. Because it was known to be good whiskey at that time, even though it wasn't delineated necessarily as bourbon. But Bourbon County was named first. It was named, I think, 1785, and the first recorded use of the word bourbon, I think, is...
Not until 1820.
I was going to say,
in the newspaper, yeah, it was 1820.
There was some grocer or something that ordered bourbon.
Yeah, so, I mean, a lot of people say it comes from Bourbon Street, New Orleans. Probably more than likely, because back around that time, right after the Revolutionary War, we named everything after the French. So I think it was probably named after the Bourbon family.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, well, Bourbon Street, Bourbon Street itself, I think, was named in 1720, if I'm not mistaken, after the French royal family. Bourbon County, at least what I've read and what kind of you sent me and what I've checked up on, was also named in honor of, forget which king it was, Louis the 16th?
I think it was Louis, yeah. I don't remember which
16th, 17th, I forget which Louis it was. It was one of the multitudes of Louis over there, but was also named in honor of his aide, which was from the royal Bourbon family.
And the county seat of Bourbon
is Paris.
Paris, yes.
Is Paris. So you can definitely tell the French influence. I've never actually, noticed if there's any old buildings here that have any French influence in the architecture. I don't know of any. I don't know if there's any surviving. That would actually be kind of a neat little side thing to see if there's any French influence.
You hear something, a couple of the buildings. Courthouse is over that way.
Yeah.
You can see the top of it. But so yeah, this is. I mean, there's always arguments about how it became known as bourbon. Who was the first one to introduce charred barrels? If you listen to the tales in Scott County, Elijah Craig did.
Right.
About accidentally burning his barn down. And the barrels burned on the inside.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how that would work, how you would char the inside of a barn, and how you would just, if a barn burns down, I've seen a couple barns burn down, it's not just like a small fire. A big wood barn burns pretty hot. It's going to burn that barrel to ashes. So I'm going to kind of say I'm debunking on that one.
A lot of people think that, because back then barrels were used for everything, transport everything, and a lot of people say it was, charred.
To kind of clean out the residue of whatever it was before. That seems to make more sense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm guessing that it probably, even in Europe, probably started that way, because even at that time, before bourbon was a thing, they were using charred cask in Europe to
They were.
for brandy and that sort of thing.
Brandy was the big thing. Now, if you ask Michael Veach, renowned bourbon historian, he believes it was the French brothers, Tarascon brothers, that were working to transport bourbon from Louisville to New Orleans, and they were French, and they knew about brandy being in charred barrels. So that
seems the most sense.
That's one of the arguments he'll make about it. So there's a lot of stuff. It's hard to really narrow down to exactly what it was, but those people were coming in. Like I said, the late 1700s, and it wasn't like a place that was very welcoming.
No, at that time it was both difficult to get here, especially if you came overland. I know some of the tales, especially kind of coming through the Cumberland Gap, there's literally stories of women and children walking barefoot through the snow and along the riverside.
Stories here for you.
Yeah, go ahead and give us a couple.
This one is from the Methodist Bishop Francis Asbury, and we have an Asbury.
Yeah, Asbury College. Yeah.
So he was traveling the Wilderness Road in 1793, and he wrote in his journal, "What a road!" with the exclamation point. Certainly the worst on the whole continent, even in the best weather, yet bad as it was. There were 400 or 500 crossing the rude hills. So 400 or 500 people. Men, women, and children, almost naked, walking along barefoot and bare-legged, laboring up the rocky hills, while those who are best off have only a horse for 2 or 3 children to ride. So the wealthy people had horses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is another one. This is a merchant from Connecticut named Moses Austin. He stated, he said, "I cannot omit noticing the many distressed families I pass in the wilderness, nor can anything be more distressed to a man feeling than to see women and children in the month of December
There you go.
traveling in the wilderness through ice and snow, passing large rivers and creeks without shoes or stocking, and barely as many rags as covers their nakedness, without money or provisions except what the wilderness affords." So it sounds like it's pretty tough.
Pretty tough going. And I'll actually throw a map up that shows both this kind of section of the United States that we're in, along with the route kind of overlaid. So if you look at that, if you look at, right here we go. In order to go, basically, either way you went, you either had to start very far north, for instance, like in Pennsylvania, and come down like the Monongahela type kind of area in the Ohio River, or you had to go through, and actually a lot of these people already lived in Virginia, so you had, in order to get into central Kentucky, you had to cross the Appalachian Mountains somewhere. And so the Cumberland Gap, if you actually look on the map, the road actually goes south before it can go north.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, so it has to almost make a U, which makes it both longer and harder to get here. But people were willing back then to come here because basically free land grants from Virginia. Once they got here, this is what's called the Great Meadow, and it really opened up. And I mean, there's really excellent farmland here. There's excellent streams. There's excellent water. There's all kinds of reasons to go through all that hardship to get here. And then especially once you got here, if you were a farmer from before, you knew how to grow grains, most likely you also knew how to distill before you even got here.
Most likely, yes. And a lot of people know the Wilderness Road, but do you know there's a branch of it?
A branch of the Wilderness Road?
Yep. The Daniel Boone.
Oh, the
actual
Boone's Trace.
Boone's Trace. Wilderness Road runs through the Cumberland Gap and goes west, and actually goes all the way to Louisville.
Right.
Boone's Trace actually cuts off of that and runs through Richmond up to Fort Boonesboro. That's what Boone kind of carved out. Wilderness Road, which branched off into Boone's Trace.
Yep.
So.
And then, in fact, even after that, there was a branch off that one that went from Boonesboro to Athens, Kentucky, which he basically, once he kind of fell out with the inhabitants of Boonesboro there, he kind of took a few of his followers and they cut a road
Boone Station.
Yeah, from Boone Station, which I think originally was a state park or a state something or other. I think they sold it or something. Maybe they gave it away to a church or something.
Yeah, to a church, local church.
But there's lots of history in this area, both in pioneering, but also especially in bourbon, that Kentucky's, or I guess America's native spirit, not just Kentucky's, but even though most of it's made here, and honestly the best stuff is made here.
So once you had your corn and you turned it into whiskey, you know, you thought about, well, let's make some money on it, and the best way to make some money on it is to stick it on a flatboat. Right. Push yourself down the river, which was no short process. You're talking about months.
Yes, it's from Paris. I just actually looked at the mileage from Paris to New Orleans. What would your estimation be?
1,500.
Not that much.
12.
Not that much.
1,000?
Not that much.
Oh, no, tell me.
700, almost 780, 770 some miles.
And you're just going by the stream, the current. I mean,
right. Yeah. Right now, the actual waterway may actually be longer. That's by GPS on driving it, so that may actually be a straighter route. So you're looking at probably between 800 and 1,000 miles, and going through wilderness that is totally undeveloped. There's natives. There's
the natives. Kentucky was not. Natives actually did not settle in Kentucky. This was their hunting ground. So, you know, this is where they come and hunted buffalo. I mean, you know, people know Buffalo Trace. There's a reason it's called Buffalo Trace. Right. But they hunted here. And when you're going down the river on a flatboat with a bunch of bourbon barrels on it, you're not the most safe there was. No. Here's an account I got. Yeah. This is a Mr. Pryor on a flatboat. He was descending the Ohio River with a boatload of whiskey. He was so unfortunate as to get his boat sunk in a violent storm on the 28th near Wilkinsville, when he had by exertions regained some of the barrels of whiskey, so he saved some.
Man, you took a lot of work trying to get a big...
Yeah, there came 15 Mohawk Indians in canoes who abused Mr. Pryor. I was like, what abuse mean?
I wouldn't want to find out.
And took 12 barrels of his whiskey, put it in their canoes, and descended the river. So not an easy track.
Yeah, not a safe track, not an easy track. One of the things that probably impressed me the most, I think you actually shared one of those stories, is once we get to, well, I'll leave that for later, of one of the most arduous journey that was completed 13 times. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So once they got there was no coming back north on the river. So they would sell their flatboats. They'd sell their materials from the flatboat, and they would walk back.
Now, that kind of impressed me. I mean, you just got done selling literally a flatboat full of bourbon. Why wouldn't you use that money to at least buy a horse that you could ride back, and then, if nothing else, sell the horse once you got back?
I guess you could. Some of the people that have money probably, I'm sure they did. Because you're coming up the Natchez Trace.
So we've established that Kentucky was kind of a premier destination for the early pioneers and for the early distillers. But why? Why was Kentucky a good place to end up making bourbon?
Well, I mean, most of the people were coming, a lot of them were coming from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, especially Maryland, Pennsylvania. Rye grew well. Mm-hmm. But what grew well here, like the Native Americans were already growing it, was corn. So corn grew really well here. So that's how corn became the dominant grain for bourbon. We had that. We also had what makes our horses so strong.
Yeah.
And our bourbon's so good is the water.
The original was the water.
Yeah, we set on the limestone shelf. Doesn't make a big difference now, but when you're talking about late 1700s or
right.
1800s,
when your only source was either streams or springs,
yeah.
You got what you got from the water table. And the two big factors in that is, like he was saying, the limestone basically does two things. It lowers the pH, or actually raises the pH rather, so it softens the water. One of the main things is it takes the iron out of the water.
It does, yes.
And that's a huge, I've actually had a sample once at one of our distilleries. It's pretty nasty. It had some iron in it. So the goal of getting that iron out of the original water, they might not even known that, I'm sure. I doubt that they knew it at the time. They just knew that this water made good bourbon. But that's why, it was because it helped to do that.
So we got that, and then one thing we're famous for here is our change of seasons. You know, we go straight from, seems like summer to winter. I love fall. We never get a fall here.
It was on a Wednesday last year.
It's like 80 degrees, and then all of a sudden, 2 days later, it's like 50 for the highs.
But then it'll bounce back and forth. And his point being that once you put the bourbon, or at this point, basically the white dog, the unaged bourbon, in a barrel, it doesn't just sit there. It actually almost breathes with the barrel. The barrel, as the heat and humidity changes, the barrel both expands and contracts, and that allows the whiskey inside to push in and out of the wood, which interacts with the molecules of the wood, extracts a lot of the vanillins, or vanillins, I guess, a lot of the aromatic compounds in the wood. And basically not only gives it color, but also gives it flavor. And so it picks up character and flavor of the wood. And then we even see that now, even in different, it's such a prevalent thing that the good whiskey is actually on the bottom of the rick house just because of that, because it is a slower process, takes longer to age. That's why good whiskey usually takes longer to age, because that process is slower.
And kind of the last thing is we have a lot of oak. We have a lot of timber here.
A lot of barrel making materials.
All barrels are made from, fresh oak.
Yep, American white oak.
Yeah. They're tending to get, actually try some other oaks, but it's always oak. But yeah, generally white oak. So, I mean, we had lots of that. We had, tons and tons of it. So that's why. So we'll get into now, I guess we'll kind of go into our battle. It's kind of the battle royale of bourbon pioneers. Who was first?
Who was first? Who started bourbon? Yeah, so keep watching, and we'll discuss that on the next one.
Drinking dark whiskey, telling white